My next guest is Gisele Barreto Fetterman, an access and equity advocate who played a key role in her husband, Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman's election bid last year. Welcome, Gisele, and happy Women's History Month.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so before we get started on some of the other questions I have for you, I know that you've recently become a volunteer firefighter. Tell us about that experience. That's really interesting.
It's amazing. It was a dream since I was a little kid. And, I was the oldest person at the academy. So I'm at this place in my life where now I'm the oldest in some rooms, which is new. But I've responded to 25 calls so far, and I'm loving every second of the journey.
Oh, that's excellent. It's a world I don't know too much about, but I'm sure, it's amazing to have really all hands on deck in those situations. You're also really big into your philanthropic work and play such a big role. I know that you founded 412 Food Rescue and the volunteer-run Free Store. I wanted to talk to you about food insecurity and the work you've done and really try to spread awareness about this issue that probably doesn't get covered as much as it should.
Yeah, I think, people like to imagine food insecure neighbors look like, something very far away from us. In reality, it's the grandmother down the street. The numbers are really high. It's 1 in 6 and 1 in 7. And when you look at food waste in this country, those numbers are about 40%. And, I was a former math major. I know that those numbers don't add up. And I could see that there was a better way to do things. That's why he was born. My dogs are saying hello. It was a way to be creative and find solutions with what we already have. And as we see cuts that want to be made to SNAP and other things happening, you can see why this is such an important issue. I know that if I'm hungry, I'm not my best. And that's happening in schools every morning with children. You can't learn if you're hungry. You're not your best in any way if you're hungry.
Yeah, absolutely. And, moving on to another area you often speak about is your, your background. When you first came to this country, you are an undocumented immigrant, but you've really spoken about the need for compassionate immigration and a compassionate approach to this topic. How would you hope that the administration, lawmakers, stakeholders in this realm, how should they approach immigration, and what does compassionate immigration look like?
I think it's remembering that these are people, these are families, these are children, these aren't numbers. I've tried to put a face to immigration. I'm a former dreamer, which means I was brought to this country as a child. My family was fleeing violent conditions in my country. So we talk about immigration like it's something that's really far away, right? But I went to school with your children, and they were my best friends. And I think it's important to want all children to thrive, right? And compassionate means that you're looking at it as people and you're not looking at it as numbers or bargaining chips. And I think historically, that's what we've seen. We've always been bargaining chips instead of humans who deserve compassion, support, and an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going forward in terms of immigration, is there any piece of legislation or any initiative that you're looking at in particular into, how this situation is handled? We've seen that immigration has become a bit of a political football, if you will, with Republicans using it to attack the president, at the situation at the southern border. So, what are you looking forward to seeing being done on this issue?
Well, since I'm not, a legislator, I'm always going to be an advocate, and I will look at what will, I think, be best for our country and for everyone. So I think there's different pieces out there, and I will continue to support those that I believe would get us closer to something that I think we deserve to see for America, right? We look at the labor market. We know how much is struggling. We know that immigrants can make a big difference in so many ways and are a great contribution. But for me, I always felt so American. I knew that I was American, and the only thing that was missing for me was a piece of paper.
And you made such a good point there. You said you're an advocate, and this Women's History Month, I think a lot of us have been looking to see how we can uplift other women advocates and make sure there's proper intersectionality there. How would you encourage other women looking to get into philanthropy, politics, these advocacy fields in general? What kind of a piece of advice is it? What would you give them going forward? A piece of advice, if you will.
Well, I'll say all my heroes are women, so I am rooting for you. But I think our voices and our perspective is needed in all spaces, right? We're needed in the fire service. There's very few women in the fire service. We're needed in all these rooms. And I think it's easy to think that we don't belong in these spaces because we've been historically told that we don't. But I think simply doing this work is rebellion in a way, right? Our perspective is really unique and important, and it's needed. I remember reading something that there are more Johns in the Senate than there are mothers of young children. And a mother's perspective is really important. So I want to keep my John in, but it is important to have women's voices in all spaces.
Right. And you played such an integral role on the campaign trail last cycle, campaigning in a major swing state where, arguably one of the biggest women's issues, abortion access, was very much on top of that ballot. What was that experience like? Because you became, very much a known entity during that campaign, and so many of us have been introduced to you now.
Not very fun. I'm not particularly, I don't love politics. I think that it will be better. I will love it when there's more great people in it. But it was an honor to be a part of it. I got to share a message that I so much believe in, which is my husband's and his vision, and got to be part of history and, changing a seat. So all that was great. And traveling the state and meeting with folks, I love all that part of it. The politics has so much of the icky stuff that I don't particularly enjoy.
Do you think that's why you're more attracted to advocacy over politics? Because it seems like, at least I'm a journalist, so I'm not directly involved in advocacy, but it seems like it's more of a roundtable discussion. It's not nearly as cutthroat as the political world.
Yeah, I'm not. My heart is too soft for politics. And that's okay. But I think, nonprofit for me is the place I found to work on where policy has failed people, right? We work to fill those gaps that policy could fix, but hasn't yet. And it never will fully be there. But if we can help fill those spaces, then I feel like we're doing something that's really important and needed.
Yeah. And, what would be a piece of advice you would give to a young woman looking to get into advocacy? What would you tell her? What does that path look like?
So for me, it's always been about what keeps me up at night. So my work has always been based on pain in some way, right? So when I was a young immigrant to this country, we dumpster dived, and I saw firsthand what grocery stores threw out, this perfectly good food that could have fed families, instead was in a landfill, in a dumpster. So I took those experiences, the experiences that were painful, weren't that positive, and I thought, how can we work to ease the suffering for someone else? So I always tell people, find what keeps you up at night. What's that thing that hurts you? Is it injustice? Is it, inequality for women? What is that thing that tugs at you, and do that thing, like work on that. And I think that's how we find our path.
Yeah, that's such good advice, especially during Women's History Month, those of us pushing back against inequality in that realm. Gisele Barreto Fetterman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.